From Microbe TV, this is TWiP, This Week in Parasitism, episode 243. I'm Vincent Racaniello, and you're listening to the podcast about parasitism. Joining me today from New Jersey, Fort Lee, New Jersey, Dixon Despommier.
Hello, Vincent, and everybody else. A brief respite from the awful weather we've been having this summer, the heat. It's a perfect day out there. It looks like a perfect day, and it is. Low humidity, low temperatures in the low 70s, a light breeze. I spent most of the morning out on the porch watching birds and people in cars and stuff like this and just having a grand old time.
Also joining us from Maine, Daniel Griffin.
Hello, everybody.
And from Glasgow, Scotland, Christina Naula.
Hello, everybody. Also a perfect day here. And I was just thinking, who sang that song, A Perfect Day? I don't know. It was in Trainspotting as well, so probably not a parasitic reference. It just popped into my mind, but I can't remember who.
You like that movie, Trainspotting?
No, I find it quite disturbing, actually.
That's about the problems in the UK, right?
Yeah. It was in Edinburgh. It was set in Edinburgh, but that was before my time in Scotland, so...
Well, if you enjoy these science programs, we'd like to have your support. Go to microbe.tv/contribute. Today's TWiP is to solve a clinical case and get a new one for you. So Daniel, remind us what the case is.
All right, everyone. So for those of you, as I like to say, tuning in, those of you tuning back in, our last presented case from episode 241 was a woman in her 20s who had been previously healthy, comes into an urgent care in the New York tri-state area, reporting, and I quote, "I've seen small white worms in my stool since yesterday." The small, round white worms are about a centimeter in length. She reports that she recently returned from a trip to Mexico where she stayed in a luxury resort. She reports never leaving the resort, only drinking bottled water, but does volunteer that she did eat from the salad bar buffet at the resort. She reports some lower abdominal cramping, but no actual pain. She reports no fever, no chills, no rash, no diarrhea, no rectal pain, and no anal itching. Her exam is unremarkable, and she refuses a rectal exam, or maybe it's just she defers. A set of blood work is done, which is unremarkable. A stool over parasites is sent, and that comes back negative.
Okay.
You know, I was thinking when I was reading that, why would you go to Mexico and never leave the resort? Why would you go to an amazing place and not explore?
I think a lot of people do that. Yeah,
they do. And maybe they feel more secure. They go to these places, particularly the Dominican Republic, right, would be a place. And they'll go to these and they'll stay within the walls, right? So they fly in, they get picked up at the airport. They stay there. A lot of these places all inclusive. And at the end, they, I don't think that any of the hosts on this show would stay within the walls.
No,
I don't think so.
The point of going somewhere is to see it, right?
Yeah.
Correct.
So, I wouldn't do that. But, that's why the Hilton hotels were originally formed many years ago, because they wanted Americans to be able to go somewhere and have it feel like America. I mean, just think. I mean, how silly is that, right?
And yet they were very successful.
Well, there's some comfort in having something that you're familiar with.
You're right.
As long as you get out of the hotel and go look around,
true,
right?
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
Fine.
I do a lot of fishing, and I go to a lot of places where almost nobody goes except the other people who fish. And I see people with campers. The campers have lounging chairs with cup holders and a television set sitting
generators,
out.
Right? They have generators to make
absolutely.
Oh yeah, I've seen it. They put a TV up. They put out a rug and they put the table and chairs.
Right. You've seen that too, Vincent. And they're looking in the opposite direction of the river.
I have yet to see that, but that sounds crazy.
That's absolutely crazy.
I don't get it.
A lot of people like that.
I mean, you basically take your backyard and plunk it in the middle of nowhere.
That's exactly right. Exactly.
All right. We have a lot of guesses on this case. Let's get going. Dixon, do the honors, please.
Manon writes, Dear Vincent Racaniello, Dixon de Pommier, Daniel Griffin, and Christina Nola, on this Sunday afternoon, with unseasonably high temperatures of 28°C, we, a group of medical microbiology residents from Nijmegen in the Netherlands, would like to share our thoughts in response to the latest TWiP case. For the differential diagnosis of macroscopic worms observed in stool, we considered the following possibilities. Anaerobius vermicularis, Taenia solium, or T. saginata percolatus, which can be mistaken for worms, Asteris lumbricoides, or Ascrasum, Anisakiasis, where humans can serve as accidental hosts, although it usually presents differently, or possibly an artifact. Given the mild symptoms, unremarkable blood work, and the size of the shape of the worm, about 1 centimeter, and the epidemiological context, we consider an anaerobius vermicularis infection to be the most likely diagnosis. The fact that the feces microscopy comes back negative is not remarkable, as a cellophane tape test is the diagnostic standard. Ova of anaerobius vermicularis worms are deposited at night in the perianal region. Usually this comes with nightly itch, a symptom the patient, however, denies. Alongside personal hygiene measures, treatment should be considered for symptomatic patients, which consists of administering a 100 milligram dose of mebendazole on day 0 and day 14. Thank you for your case, which gave us a nice starting point for our teaching session on fecal parasites.
Daniel.
Rafid writes, Hello, TWiPers, greetings from Quebec. I believe that the most likely diagnosis of the young woman who passed 1 centimeter worms after returning from Mexico is infection with enterobius, likely acquired before she left for her trip. Perhaps her job has her in contact with young children, maybe? I would also like to make a quick comment about last month's case. Dixon was wondering how Lyme disease had ended up in the islands around Nantucket. I was under the impression that ticks often hitch a ride on migratory birds, and that this is the explanation why Lyme disease is spreading so quickly northward in Quebec. This is something I teach the GPs when I give them little disease refresher talks. Please correct me if I'm wrong so I can improve my lectures. Cheers, and thanks for your good work, Rafid. So what do you think, Dixon, on that one?
That sounds reasonable, but you have to have the deer there also, and I think it's more likely that the deer brought the adult ticks there when they swam across.
Interesting. Yeah, when I was, I think it was a couple of years back, when I was up in Quebec, in the region of Canada.
Or Quebec, as they say.
Quebec.
Quebec.
It was actually a lot of these tick-borne diseases are really spreading. It's, a combination of global warming and everything else here. So
Yeah. And increased number of people. And shrinking habitat.
Christina.
Charlie writes, Greetings to the amazing erudites of TWiP. Long-time listener, first-time writer from California, offering my amateur guess to the case of the young woman who, when having returned from a trip to Mexico, noticed small white roundworms moving in her stool. After reading through some NIH papers and consulting good old Dr. Google, I was fairly confident to diagnose Taenia saginata, commonly known as the beef tapeworm, which she would have acquired much earlier in her Mexico trip if it was already noticeably shedding proglottids. The description of the motile specimens in her stool matches the morphology of proglottids that this intestinal parasite sheds, around 6 per day for mature adults. The fact that she had no itchiness, nor rectal discomfort, just abdominal, rules out pinworm, and also pinworm looks more like long threads than round objects. It seems she is clinically defined as asymptomatic. The only problem with this guess is that Dr. Griffin specifically says that the O&P test came back negative, which specifically tests for tapeworms in the stool sample. Perhaps more tests are needed to confirm this result, but just maybe the sample of her stool that was tested did not contain any proglottids. A PCR test could be another way to confirm T. saginata. If her diagnosis is confirmed, a treatment of praziquantel or niclosamide would be started, although only praziquantel is approved for the use in the United States. As a current graduate student in computational biochemistry, I find that this is the absolute best scientific podcast out there, Microbe TV as a whole, in terms of its rigor, depth of analysis, and expertise of the members. It is such a treat to hear such hard science being offered. Thank you so much for your contributions. Wishing you all the only best in life. From an adoring fan, Charlie. Oh, I like that.
Oh, it's nice.
Yeah, that is lovely.
Thank you. Thank you, Charlie.
Yeah.
I'm glad they published my letter. No, I'm sorry. I didn't
Felix writes, Dear hosts, I'm writing to you from sunny French Atlantic coast. Wow. This case was not easy for me. The absence of anal itching led me to believe that a pinworm infection is unlikely, as that's normally the main symptom. The symptoms described seem quite mild, so anisakiasis also seems less probable. The most likely diagnostic, to my knowledge, is teniasis with the passing of proglottids. I'm not entirely sure how this patient would have contracted the infection, but that's my best guess. Repeated stool exams and serologic testings could provide clarifications. Felix, back to you, Dixon.
John writes, still hoping to win the textbook. Hello, esteemed hosts. I am still very much a newbie with this being my fourth guess, and I hope I didn't miss something obvious, but I also feel confident this is similar to TWiP 87, entitled Stumped by Pinworm, where that person also reported abdominal discomfort and no anal itching. Anaerobius vermicularis, commonly known as pinworm, isn't known for causing disease and can be treated with medications and hygiene. Sometimes these nematodes can show up in stool and be motile, white, small roundworms, about around the length reported. Since the life cycle is measured in weeks, it appears the trip to Mexico is a red herring, and that would explain Dr. Griffin telling Dixon not to say too much when Dixon says, I wouldn't blame it on Mexico. I'm glad to report I had come to my conclusion before that comment, as it was the final item I wrote down in my list of notes. If she hadn't refused a rectal exam, I imagine the Scotch tape test would have confirmed diagnosis. And since the eggs are not laid inside the GI tract, but outside on the perianal area, which is why itching is often associated, it makes sense that parasite test came back negative, although it is good to rule out co-infections too in the case of pinworm. Treatment can be expensive, but Parentel, Pamoate, is a comparably cheap over-the-counter medicine that can save hundreds of dollars on its alternatives, and if taken a second dose 2 weeks later approaches 100% efficacy due to the multi-week life cycle of pinworm. I wouldn't be surprised if we found out the patient works with children, since youths have the highest prevalence of infection, and she should pair her treatment with vigilance in hygiene to avoid reinfection.
Youths. Daniel.
Hazel writes, greeting TWiPos. I hope you're feeling well. I'm writing again from fake London, where it is an overcast and muggy 25°C, but feels like 33. Before I get to my case guess, I wanted to share the cool new trichinella tattoo I got this summer. I hope Dixon especially will appreciate it. And we have here a pretty
Dixon
impressive...
fully appreciates it.
Wow.
It's a nurse cell. It's a nurse cell. Look. This is fabulous with all the anatomical structures. That's beautiful.
Most of the inner side of the forearm here. So
that is remarkable. I hope it wasn't painful.
On to the case of the woman from Mexico. After consulting the PD7 PDF, my guess is good old Anaerobius vermicularis, the pinworm. I started my process of elimination by looking for white roundworms of the correct size, approximately 1 centimeter, and then narrowed it down to hookworms or pinworms. Both can be symptomless, but hookworm would not be present in stool as they live in the small intestine. Hookworm eggs would also likely have shown up on the O&P. as they are plentiful in stool. And lastly, neither anemia nor eosinophilia were noted in the blood test. Hookworm is voted off the island. Pinworm infection. I don't know if everyone gets that reference, but it's one of my middle daughter's favorite show, Survivor, where they vote people off the island. So
I didn't get that at all.
Hookworm's been voted off the island. Pinworm infection is also often, even usually, asymptomatic. So lack of itching, cramps, etc. do not rule it out. O&P tests will not detect pinworm. Neither does it cause any eosinophilia or anything else that would show up on a blood test, as far as I can tell. And while it is uncommon, a heavy worm burden can result in adults being seen on the stool. I think we have a winner. PD7 tells me it typically takes 5 weeks from infection to egg laying, so I believe that the woman's trip to Mexico is entirely unrelated. I am going to go out on a limb and guess she works with young kids in some capacity and was infected well before her trip. As she is living in the U.S., treatment would be with parental, repeated after 2 to 3 weeks to catch any stragglers hatched after the first round. I'd also recommend washing sheets, blankets, towels, etc., hot water, and drying on blast furnace setting. Thanks again for all you do, Hazel. And P.S. It's my birthday on Saturday, August 31st, and a copy of Parasitic Diseases 7 would be a great present, just saying.
Great. Christina.
Jay writes, Dear Trypozoites, I'll start with a quotation. Listen to your patient. He's telling you the diagnosis. That was William Osler, a leader of 19th century medical education and purportedly the first North American physician to bring medical students out from the lecture hall and over to patients' bedsides for clinical training. This patient, a woman in her 20s, saw motile white worms about 1 centimetre in length in her stool shortly after returning from a week-long trip to a luxury resort in Mexico. She had no other significant symptoms. The day after seeing those worms, she presented to an urgent care. Stool, ova and parasite exam was ordered, and those results were negative. As I was listening to the case description, I was asking questions in my head such as, what does she do for a living? And does she live alone or with people? The TWiP team began asking those same questions. Then Dixon made a comment. I wouldn't blame that one on Mexico. Dixon, you took the words out of my mouth. Motile, 1 centimetre long white worms visible on stool strongly suggest Enterobius vermicularis. It takes 4 to 6 weeks from ingestion of eggs to the time that roughly 1 centimetre long female worms exit the anus to lay eggs on the perianal skin. Occasionally, some of these worms end up in the stool. Given this 4 to 6 week maturation time, this woman acquired her pinworm infection before she went to Mexico. I'll end up with a twist on Osler's quotation. Listen to Dixon, he's telling you the diagnosis. Thank you for the hint, Dixon, and thanks as always to the rest of the Trypozoites for your education and entertainment. Jay. P.S. I'm not sure what to call all of you. Last month, one listener wrote Trypozoites, and I loved that. What would you prefer? Perhaps you should take nominations and put it to a vote. I nominate Trypanosomes. I like them all.
Yeah, they're
they're all really good greetings. So thank you, Jay.
Friedhoff writes, hello, dear Twipsters. Greetings from Hanover, Germany. It's always nice to think about something captivating like your monthly enigmas when you really should be studying for your finals. The woman in her 20s returning from Mexico has a pinworm infection, I would say. Enterobius vermicularis can be detected with an adhesive tape test. This parasite is extremely common here in Germany and probably also in the U.S., so the infection in this case is not necessarily connected to the vacation, but maybe to an exposition at home or at her workplace. Talking of which, it seems like the real question here is what she does for a living. I would guess she works with children, maybe in a kindergarten or daycare. You should also reveal this second mystery. Yours, Friedhoff. Ah, excellent. Dixon.
Rod writes, hi all at TWiP. I have been enjoying TWiP for the past few years. I'm a retired science teacher and studied parasitology as part of a degree in biology back in the 1980s at Northeast London Polytechnic. Having recently listened to all the early episodes of TWiP in order to brush up on my parasitological knowledge, I suspect that the lady in question with small white motile worms in her stool has a pinworm infection, Enterobius fibicularis, episode number 19. Her doctor, therefore, should treat her with mebendazole or similar antihelminthic medications. Other members of her household may also require treatment, as this is an infectious condition. Thanks again for keeping us informed, educated, and entertained. Warmest regards from North Portugal.
Daniel.
Justin writes, Dear TWiP hosts, for the case of a young woman with small roundworms and no other symptoms, my first thought is pinworms. They are about the right size and very common. They can be asymptomatic, but often cause anal itching. If it is pinworms, it would have taken several weeks for worms to start being present in the stool, ruling out an infection while in Mexico. Perhaps the patient works with young children. That might explain the route of exposure. All the best, Justin.
Christina.
Hawken writes, greetings again from sunny Athens. For this week's case, I narrowed it down to two potential options, given the lack of worms in hand, the lack of ova seen on stool examination, and the lack of a Scotch tape test mentioned. Law of average says she acquired pinworms from the salad line by an individual who didn't wash their hands. However, it is also possible she managed to acquire some sort of cestoid. In this case, I would suggest an infection by Dipylidium caninum. While there, it's possible a flea managed to work its way into the salad bar from a stray animal, and she ingested it unknowingly, thus giving her the cestoid. While much less likely than the pinworm, they are 1 centimeter long worms. You would not necessarily see ova in the stool, for as the proglottis shed independently. I find it much more likely she contracted Enterobius vermicularis while abroad, either through aerosolization from handling infected currency or from someone who inoculated the salad spoon after a trip to the bathroom. Scotch tape test might help confirm. Thanks for another fun case. Hawken.
Rita writes, enterobiasis, pinworms. The young woman's recent vacation in Mexico may be a red herring. There are plenty of pinworms to go around here in the USA. Pinworm ova escape detection in the feces because the worm deposits her eggs on the external perianal area of the host. This itches like the blue blazes. I know this because I have been a sufferer of enterobiasis myself. I'm surprised that the patient did not describe itching symptoms because it's pretty darned hard to ignore. Was she perhaps too shy to mention it? I had the same thought. Yes. Pinworm ova are spread by the host scratching down there and spreading ova by unwashed hands. The unfortunate host may have ingested food prepared with insufficiently washed hands. Use a brush to get under those nails. It's remotely possible to contract during sexual intimacy. Pinworms are more common in children, but I'm here to tell you that young adults can also be infected. I'm writing from beautiful Owyhee County, Idaho, where it's sunny and a comfortable ADF. Thank you for the discussion on babesiosis. I lost my good working sheepdog a couple of years ago to hemolytic anemia that I suspect was caused by babesiosis, acquired in the tick-abundant places where we work. I've become a staunch believer in tick control products for my dogs. Thank you for informative and for fun for me shows and podcasts.
You might add with a delightful little drawing of a worm right next to the diagnosis.
Yeah, there's a cute little...
I like it.
Cute little...
that is immersion into our field.
Image there. It's very nice, yeah.
Jared writes, I am sure this one will be solved quickly, so I will write now before bed. This is the same sort of parasite in many cats. My guess is roundworms, and I cannot guess the occupation of the woman involved because this is far too common. In parens, sadly, I am between jobs at the moment, so I too am a parasite. Jared.
Oh dear. Oh my gosh. Daniel.
All right. David writes, greetings. I hope this email finds you all well and enjoying the remaining days of summer. The case of the 1 centimeter long white worms in stool reported by the traveler returning from Mexico seems likely to be a case of pinworms. While the stool O&P comes back negative, it may be that the infection is not severe enough to be detected yet. I consider tapeworms a possible source, but that seems unlikely given both their rarity and, more importantly, the reported 1 centimeter size of the worm seen. Perhaps the young woman was exposed to pinworm eggs prior to the trip to Mexico, and the worms thrived and enjoyed the vacation as much as she did. Very curious to the source of the exposure and looking forward to hearing the rest of the story. Thanks, as always, for another informative and entertaining episode. David in Maryland.
That does it for our listener guesses.
All right. We've got some other guesses, right? Who should we start with? Does anyone want to volunteer?
Sure do.
Who's feeling brave?
I'll go last.
Ladies
go
first,
ahead.
Christina. Should we do that?
All right. Okay. Okay.
Exactly. Good idea.
So I really wanted this to be a tapeworm because, I don't know, we haven't had many tapeworm cases, I think, on TWiP, if I remember correctly. But I think I've seen a little tapeworm proglottid myself once, a long time ago. And actually, I don't really want to think about where that came from, hopefully from my cat. But it didn't really look like... didn't really fit the description. It was kind of, I don't know, it just didn't look round, and wasn't quite a centimeter long, but I don't know. I think probably this sounds like a pinworm infection. We did have a pinworm infection quite recently, so I worried a bit that we might not have two similar cases or two of the same infections in a short period of time, but why not? They are common. I wasn't too worried about the itching because a lot of pinworm infections are not causing an itch. I think that's an allergic reaction. I do remember looking that up. So I wasn't too worried about that. So I think I'm tentatively going with pinworms, enterobius. Sorry, that was probably a bit more detailed or longer than you wanted it, particularly the little proglottid.
Well, I have a two-word answer for you: pinworm.
So you're going with that, Vincent. Did you want to throw a guess in before we discuss?
It's clearly pinworm. There's no
pinworm.
question about it. And the Mexico trip is a red herring. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and you can't catch pinworm from red herrings.
So why is this the case, Dixon? You want to sort of walk through the guesses and why pinworm is the diagnosis without doubt here?
Sure. I mean, first of all, it was nothing that she caught in Mexico because parasites don't mature that fast. So when she got back, which was only a week of a trip, she expressed these worms in her stool, and she was observant enough to see them, which most people don't look at their stools, by the way. But in Europe, I've noticed that they have little platforms in the back of the toilet, which allows the stool to sit there, and you can actually get up and turn around and look to see if anything is in your stool besides just stool.
Oh, my granny had one of those toilets. I remember that.
Yeah, do you remember that?
Not pleasant. Not
no,
pleasant.
Maybe the new ones are not, but I'm old enough to remember the old days when you had to put one foot on one side of a hole and another foot on the other side of the hole and hope for the best, mostly in Spain, by the way. But so pinworm is a parasite which is ubiquitous. That is to say, it's the most common infection of humanity. I don't think there's any other thing as common as that causes even close to clinical symptoms. It's everywhere. It's spread by air or sometimes by contact. Autoinfection is possible when you scratch, little kids scratch, pick up the adult worms with the eggs, which, by the way, embryonate in a remarkably short time. If you were a nematologist and you wanted to study nematode development and you had pinworm eggs, in 6 hours they would be larvae. And that's remarkably fast. That's one of the reasons why it's so effective. The other thing, it resists environmental conditions that are a little bit harsh, not terribly harsh, but harsh enough so that you wouldn't suspect anything would live through that, but they do. They're very common in daycare centers, very common to find them on the windowsills. You take a white glove, for instance, and get the dust from the windowsill of a daycare center, bring it back to the lab, and you see the empty little shells of the dried out eggs that were there even from last semester. So I would say that this was a very wonderful presentation because you're right, there was no symptoms. The only thing you had to do, just believe your patient. Osler was correct. If they tell you they're sick, they're sick. And then you have to find out why. You can't doubt their diagnosis. In this case, it wasn't a sickness, but rather an observation.
Daniel, what was the one of these people, I can't find it now, had a second question that to you to answer. Do you remember what that was?
Let me see. I guess I'll go through. Maybe we'll sort of run across it here as we're doing it. But yeah, right. So that's number one. And I think this is great. Like, everyone gets excited, returning traveler, what do they have? Something exact. But this is why we teach the life cycles. It's important to know what is going to mature into an adult worm that's going to come out the anus in a week after a trip. The answer is nothing. So that's number one. Number two is, why do you do an ova and parasite, right? And a lot of our listeners were saying, because there might be a co-infection. Well, interesting enough, with pinworm, it might be you expect it to be negative, right? So the negative O and P is what we're expected, consistent with our diagnosis. We don't expect it to be positive. And one of the challenges is the Scotch tape test or the paddle test, which is a little paddle with adhesive. A lot of labs don't even do those anymore. So this is becoming more and more a clinical diagnosis. Like how many doctors, just let our audience sort of think, have you gone to where you see the doctor and he says, let me go take that and look at it under a microscope, right? I mean, doctors don't have microscopes that they're using on a regular basis anymore. This is how it's going to present. It's going to be either the anal itching, or as we see here, you don't have to have the anal itching. It's going to be, they're describing to you an adult female pinworm. And you need to know what that looks like. You need to know, like when they give that description, someone says, hey, I've got this furry thing and it's got 4 legs and it barks, let me send that to the lab, right? I mean, we've got to like recognize the descriptions here.
Sure.
So I think that's those are important. Like why was the OMP? Oh, look at that!
Here's a doctor with a microscope.
We can come to you.
So
this
was my father's microscope from his medical office.
Wow.
Okay. His office opened in the 1960s.
In the old days, that's the way it was done.
I got this, and he also had a box of slides of various tissues, and one of them had schistosomiasis on it. But anyway, I'm using this as a paperweight here in my office.
Funny enough, I also have a microscope. It's upstairs, and I have an entire box full of parasitic slides that I use for teaching, but I also have a microscope in my house.
It's all gone by the wayside.
Yeah. I don't use it as a paperweight, though.
I did want to add one thing to Christina's perhaps hesitancy as to distinguishing between the pinworm and the tapeworm, because it's been a long time since you saw a live tapeworm. But that was the first worm I saw as a technician at Columbia. A woman had passed 7 tapeworms.
Didn't you see the dean first?
7 whole tapeworms.
No. The head of the lab took me over to the room.
Are you accusing the dean of being a tapeworm? But okay.
No. This was not the dean. This was Dr. Harold Brown, and he allowed me to bring the tapeworm back to the lab. Tapeworms, as it turned out, but there was easy to see that they were flat.
Yeah.
And that's the giveaway.
Yeah. Well, and that's the one that I saw was quite flat as well. It wasn't round. It didn't fit.
Yeah, exactly right. So,
Daniel,
if you saw them side by side, you'd never make the mistake.
The question I was thinking of, one of the listeners said, tell us what she did for a living.
Right.
Yeah. So, it's interesting. So she went to urgent care. So there's a lot of like this detailed history that we would, it's funny. As an infectious disease doctor, I mean, immediately I was like, I know what this is. But then we ask questions anyway. because we just kind of have to, right? We're like, I mean, I can't leave a patient's room without, hey, where were you born and where did you grow up and where have you traveled? Even though they're there for community-acquired pneumonia. And so, we don't get as much history as I think an ID infectious disease doctor would like. But actually, I'm going to say in this situation, you do want to know this history because you want to know who she's living with, because, go ahead, treat her. But if you don't treat those 3 young children, I mean, maybe this is a lady's trip down to Mexico to just get a little bit of a break for this, new mom or young mom. And now you've got to think about, if you don't treat the husband, the kids, then she's just going to get reinfected, right? If she's working in some kind of a setting where the kids are infected, then, sort of let people know because another impact. So it's actually interesting. There's this new code because, in certain medical specialties, let's say you have hypertension, they're talking to you. They're like, you've got hypertension. This is the medicine, how we measure you. But in infectious disease, right, it's like, okay, you're the patient right now, but we may have to treat like your sexual partner, your children, your family, the people you're exposed to, because this, these pinworm eggs, and, Dixon was describing it, this female comes to the surface of the anus in the wee hours of the night. And then she, in her final dying act, right, she averts her uterus, spraying these eggs, 3 feet all over the place. They're everywhere. And, and this whole idea of like washing the sheets. I mean, yeah, you should wash your sheets, but you're not going to get rid of all these. So the way you get rid of pinworm is you've got to basically destroy the habitat. So everyone needs to take the medicine 2 to 3 weeks later. Everyone's got to take the medicine again because there's going to be eggs. And those eggs are going to be ingested, and those eggs are going to be embryonated in less than 8 hours. So 6 hours, they're going to go. So that's the way you address this. There's really no way to think that you could just clean the environment with bleach or something else. You got to get all the people on board so that they're not just another source of repeated infections.
That's right. And in fact, taking the sheets off the bed and shaking them, that's a perfect way of redistributing everybody.
I'd go running,
have some pinworms,
right?
everybody. Have some
just spray them on the ceiling, have them float down. And
Dr. Brown, upon noticing the affluence of certain patients that had this problem, suggested strongly and correctly too, I think, that if they're planning a vacation in the near recent future, they should coincide that with when they seal up the house and turn up the heat. And when you turn up the heat and dry out the house, all the eggs die. So he used to say when they dry, they die. That was one of his euphemisms that he would use in class. But in this case, it's absolutely correct. The eggs will dry out and die if you create enough heat with enough lack of moisture in the atmosphere. So, and not a very good way of dealing with the epidemiology of this, though. The one that I remember most, which is, if we have time for me to repeat this just briefly, a non-English speaking couple and their 3 children showed up in the clinic, and all the children had pinworm. So they sent the patients home, but first they demonstrated how to do the Scotch tape test, or we used to call it these sticky clear tape tests because Scotch is a brand name. And so they had a baby doll that they had undressed and bent over, and then they inserted the Scotch tape test in the proper area for the perianum, and they told the parents to do the same every morning for a week. Here are your tests.
I know where that's
Bring
going.
them back. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. She sees it coming. And indeed, that's exactly what they did, Christina. They brought back an entire week's worth of Scotch tape tests for 3 children, all of which was negative. And they could not believe it. They can't be negative. They just can't be. And they said, please show us how you did the test. And they were very proud of themselves. They had brought paper bags with them, and each child had a separate doll. It's easy to make fun of that, but if you don't speak English, and you have to be shown something, you better show them the right thing. And in this case, they did not. And they, of course, then they treated them anyway. And in those days, the treatment was with gentian violet. It was a pill that was made by, I forget which company, maybe Lederle, and they made a pill called, it was an anti-pinworm pill, and it would break up with a special coating in the large intestine, not in the small intestine. And when it did, it would kill the worms. And we used to test out those pills every now and then, and every time we did, we got paid $10. So we had to take the pills for 2 days, and then for the next 2 days, we had to bring in our stool samples. This is laboratory technicians now, and strain them over a metal strainer and find the little pieces of pill that broke up, or whole pills. Sometimes they were testing as to whether the coating was any good or not. So those were the good old, or you might say the bad old days, because we have completely different modes of dealing with diagnosis and treatments now. But that's what I inherited as a technician, starting my career as a parasitologist.
This is why, Nixon, you need to come on TWiP, because you have all these stories. You know?
Yes,
absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, this one I remember the most, though, because.
So, Daniel, what was the outcome here?
Yeah, so it was, the clinical diagnosis was made and the patient was treated. And, I think some of our writers commented that, something like an albendazole or mebendazole, like $100, $200, a treatment. So
Exactly. That's too
much better, just the parental pomoate. It's, something you can, order, you can pick up at your local pharmacy. It's a few dollars. It's weight-based, so you just look at it. And then really important, right, is that repeating the dose 2 to 3 weeks later. And this is the whole idea that those eggs are there. So you take the dose, you kill the females. Now, 2 to 3 weeks later, the females are starting to, mature from those embryonic eggs that you've, ingested. But they haven't reached a point where they can produce new eggs, because that takes about 6 weeks. So that's why your window, you want to, kill all the adults that are in there. The eggs are still going to be in your environment. You're going to get reinfected. And so now you're going to go ahead and treat for that. So, every so often we might even do, day 0, 2 weeks, and then 4 weeks. And just, then you're basically a pretty solid 100%. But you got to treat everybody.
I just wanted to say something on treatment. Actually, here in the UK, we buy it's called Ovix, the medication, and it's actually mebendazole, and it's cheap as dirt. So I think you can get a family pack for about £10 or thereabouts. So, so maybe I can start an export business.
No, it's so funny. Yeah. So albendazole and mebendazole, like when I go down to Panama, it's like 50 cents a pill, but it's over $100 for that same pill here in the US. So just amazing, the markup. So
there was another drug that they used to give called piperazine citrate. And piperazine is a neurotoxin for nematodes. And in fact, it was used to study the Ascaris lumbricoides nervous system to show how it works. They used piperazine as one of the neuroinhibitors. The point is that piperazine is a sweetened product. It's got a sugar base to it, so the kids will take it. And they stopped using it because once the kids found out that they had to take medicine, and they didn't want to take it at first, it was going to taste bad and everything. And all of a sudden, they were just like candy, and they would drink the whole bottle the next day. So they changed the formulation to make it taste bad on purpose. Very interesting sociology. So how many guesses did we have?
What's that? How many?
I don't know. Are we ready for the drum roll yet?
Giveaway. How many guesses who had not won a book before?
13 guesses.
That's a lot.
So let's find a random number between 1 and 13. Dixon, you ready with the drum roll? Number 2. Number 2, Dixon. Oh, number 2 is Charlie, who is our adoring fan. How appropriate.
Perfect.
Very appropriate. I don't know. I would even be willing to pay for the book, although we give them away, so why would we pay anything? The woman who had the tattoo of the nerve cell on her arm, she deserves something special. I mean, she went through great pain and lengths to permanently remind her of the fact that parasitism is a host and a parasite. And I think that's a fabulous tattoo. I've never seen anything as wonderful as that. I will go to bed tonight with dreams of this arm.
Well,
I'm
you
not
can always
joking.
get yourself a tattoo with a nurse Phil.
I wouldn't go that
What
far.
will be the parasite of your choice for your tattoo?
For me?
Yeah, what would you choose?
No, I would get a duplicate.
You would get a duplicate. What about you, Daniel?
I'm probably not going to get a tattoo. Just
okay.
Maybe we could.
If you had to get a parasite tattoo,
if you were drunk enough,
if I had to, I'm gonna have to think on this. This will be like a topic,
Okay. Yeah, I'd go for a jar. Because they're quite pretty.
Daniel, you won't get two hands clapping?
See, that's what I'll need to get.
I would get poliovirus for sure.
Of course,
yeah.
But of course.
For sure.
But of course.
All right. So, Charlie, what you need to do is send an email to TWiP at microbe.tv in the subject line, TWiP 243 book winner, and send us your address. If you are in the U.S., yes, you're in California, just your address will do, and we'll ship you a book.
Right.
All right. Time for a hero, Christina.
Yeah. So I'd like to talk to you about, I would like to celebrate a woman parasitologist who recently celebrated her 100th birthday. That in itself, I find that quite amazing, actually. Imagine being 100. So this hero is not a hero that I selected, but it was a hero that was suggested by John Shee, one of our listeners, who is an associate professor of biology at Crichton University, and he emailed recently. But having read about this woman, Mary Louise Hanson Pritchard, I kind of wish I had selected her myself because she's pretty awesome. So she was born on the 16th of July, 1924, and hence her 100th birthday recently. And she had an entire, I think, 2 or 3 day kind of celebrations in her former university that was dedicated to her. So when I kind of write up the heroes, I always kind of want to find out a little bit about, where they come from and what did they do as children. But I couldn't actually find anything other than she was born and raised in Lincoln in Nebraska, where she also spent most of her working life. So I can't really tell you anything about little Mary when she was a little girl, whether she always wanted to be a parasitologist or not. So I can start with her university education, which she began in 1942. She was an undergraduate at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. I'm not sure if I pronounced that correctly, actually. Lincoln?
Yep, that's good.
Yep.
Okay, there you are. She completed her studies in 1946 with a BSc in Business Administration with distinction, and she majored in economics, accounting, French, and zoology. That's really unusual combination of topics, and I'm not sure this would be possible today, or well, at least not in our British higher education system that I'm most familiar with. So that's really an unusual combination of subjects to study, I think. She was quite an exceptional student, and even during her undergraduate studies, she was awarded fellowships and awards, including a Regents Fellowship. But I have to admit my ignorance because I'm not familiar with it. But from what I read, it sounds like a prestigious kind of fellowship. I don't know if any of you is familiar with that particular fellowship. No, so I feel a bit less ignorant, then that's okay. So she was also elected into societies. And again, societies is not something that, as a European scientist, I'm very familiar with, but I'm sure our American listeners will understand just how much of an achievement this was. So she was elected, for example, to Phi Beta Kappa, which is the Academic Honoris Society and the oldest of its kind in the US, and also into another society, the Romance Languages Honoris Society, and at least one more. And that was before she even completed her studies. She then went on to do a Master's of Science in Zoology, again at the University of Nebraska. And she worked in Harold Manter's laboratory, and she was studying the taxonomy and systematics of digeans from Bermuda fishes, so trematodes, essentially flukes. So she did really exceptionally well. Again, for that graduate degree, she received a Walcott Prize, and that recognized her as an outstanding Department of Zoology graduate. And this must have come with quite some money, because as we hear later, she actually used some of that to further her education. So at that time, which I find quite sad, really, living as a woman who can do pretty much anything that I'd like to do in terms of education now. So at that time, women were not recommended for doctoral studies in STEM subjects, which must have been very disappointing for Mary Louise Pritchard. But she was still exceptionally successful as an independent scientist. So going back to that prize money that she won, she used that to conduct research in Honolulu. And she's actually known to be the first person to collect parasites from Hawaiian fishes. I think she was a fairly determined lady. Then she became really an integral part of the university in Nebraska, and specifically the Harold Manter Research Program, where she did her zoology MSc degree. So this appears to be a super important and active center of systematic parasitology. I read that it now contains the largest collection of parasites in a university museum worldwide. So in 1968, Mary Louise Pritchard became an associate curator of parasitology of the University of Nebraska State Museum, and assistant professor in the Department of Zoology. So she did her own research, and she collected vast numbers of parasites for study. In 1971, the Harold Manter Laboratory was established as the Division of Parasitology at the University in Nebraska State Museum. And she was the first curator there. So previously she was an assistant curator, but now she becomes the actual curator for that collection. And she kind of was quite a visionary. She built up a collection into a national resource for parasitology. And under that curatorship, it became a repository for specimens, and not just for all types of parasites, but also for voucher specimens, which other people can use for identification purposes. So I suppose exemplar specimens that would be used for comparison, I suppose. And she also established other collections, not just parasitic ones, and also some orphan species. So, she was quite a visionary, really. She probably was interested in biodiversity long before most of us. So in 1980, she finally got a full tenure and a full professorship, which I think was really good, because she did never do a PhD from what I could read. So I think that was an amazing achievement. And so she was an exceptional parasitologist, and she really contributed a lot to the field of parasitology. So, for example, that Manter lab in that museum received accreditation from the American Association of Museums, which only very few museums actually get. So she was not only a really good scientist, and I think, she was really good at I can't say it, in the systematics. You know what I'm trying to say, help me. But she also said to be a really encouraging mentor for students, and she did really promote their successes. And I think being a great mentor is maybe not always valued as much in great scientists. And I would really like to give her special praise for that. So, for example, the graduate students that working under her mentorships, they produced more than 125 publications between 1972 and 1988, which I think in a field of parasitology is quite a large number. So that was good. And in 1994, the museum was awarded accreditation by the American Association of Museums. I think I've already mentioned that. But the report states that in 2 collection areas, parasitology and vertebrate paleontology, the collections are world-class and are models of curatorial quality and expertise. They were adjoined to examine. So I think really, particularly in relation to the parasitology collection, that is Mary Louise Pritchard's merit. So I don't know for sure, I'm sure she faced a lot of challenges just for being a woman scientist in a time when women were more often than not underappreciated for their scientific abilities. She must have been a truly formidable woman. And I hope that you agree with John, who suggested her as a hero, that she's a truly deserving hero of parasitology. And I think it would be actually really fun to meet her and have a chat. If she were available, that would be really fun. Although maybe at 100, she's maybe got other hobbies now. So yeah, that was the hero.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you, John, for sending it in.
Let me add also, Vincent, before you go further, I knew this woman.
She
was at all the parasitology meetings, and I began my career as a parasitologist by going to that meeting. And she was always available. She sat down and talked with you. She was interested in you. She was a really wonderful woman, very warm, very giving, and very encouraging.
Yeah, I
Wonderful.
think that came across really. And I actually so John gave us a link that kind of summarizes her life as a scientist, but I found another one that I put into the show notes as well that we can maybe share with our listeners. And that's really it's like a transcript of the presentation of the President's Special Award for Distinguished Service that she received. And it's really well written, and it's open access, so you can have a look at that at any time.
Very
it reads well. So yeah, I enjoyed reading up on her.
So Daniel, you have another case for us?
I do. And this case comes from Panama, midsummer, right? So we're end of summer, midsummer. So this is a recent case, and let us tell the story. Now, I'm actually going to have an individual from Floating Doctors come on our show October 4th to do the unveil and tell us a little bit more about this case. But this is another case from Panama, and a provider for Floating Doctors is working in the coastal region in northeastern Panama. We've had a few cases from here. So this case involves a 1-year-old living in one of these remote communities. It's a 1-year-old, so the history is a bit difficult, right? This 1-year-old is not verbal; they're not actually, telling us much of a history. But what we can surmise is apparently there was initially a scratch or some sort of break in the skin, as this 1-year-old had otherwise been healthy, maybe could have had some better nutrition. But over a period of time, this initial break in the skin expands. It actually becomes a deep necrotic wound on the leg. Several other nearby wounds develop and become deep and infected. And actually, having seen like pictures of these wounds, it just deep necrotic. By the time this 1-year-old is seen by this provider, actually much of the leg appears eaten away. And unfortunately, this is just the tip of the iceberg, as they've now noted a number of others in the area developing similar wounds.
The other individuals, you mean?
Yeah, other individuals in this area. So now they've actually been reports of many others in this community and these areas developing similar
ages?
Presentations.
Different ages?
Different ages, not all quite as young. Yeah.
Is this an area where people are living in rural situations?
So it's I don't know if I've we've ever shared any pictures, but so a lot of these communities, right, are remote. Most of them you can only reach by boat. So these are small communities where this 1-year-old, I'm going to say, was living, so very small, very rural. No running water. The water's all collected from rainwater. The floating doctors goes out to these communities, try to get there at least not less frequently than every 3 months.
And the roof is thatched, for example, on the homes?
Some of the roofs, like one of the first things the floating doctors will do is put in a couple tin roofs in the community to use for water collection. But yeah. Yeah, but there are a lot of, I think you're raising there are a lot of bugs, there are a lot of insects in these areas.
And presumably this child is playing outside all day, right?
He's only 1-year-old, Vince.
This 1-year-old actually spends most of their time, or did spend most of their time, out of doors, maybe more out of doors time than most other 1-year-olds in the community. Okay. Got any more questions about this 1-year-old?
Were you able to save the leg?
Unfortunately,
sorry, that's not related to the diagnosis.
No. That's actually okay, because as I intimated, this 1-year-old is no longer with us.
Oh, that's a shame.
So yeah.
Okay.
So we have a 1-year-old. They initially scratched and break in the skin. We're not getting any kind of history from the 1-year-old. No other medical history that we're aware of. I will say there was an issue in these communities where some of the individuals who ended up with these issues were kind of on this diet of soup and not getting a lot of good protein in their diet. And I know when I was last down there, we were trying to talk about how some of the myths that had led to this soup diet needed to be sort of updated with current science. But
All right. Thank you, Daniel. So if you want to send in a guess for this case, you should send it in an email to TWiP@microbe.tv. Put TWiP 241 case in the subject line, and we'll be able to take your guesses until October 1st, because we will do the reveal shortly after that. So October 1st, TWiP@microbe.
TWiP 243, right?
243, yes. 243 in the subject lines. Okay. We have a couple of emails, but in the nature of time, I think we will do them next time.
I like the first one. Can we do the first one quickly?
Do the first one? Yeah. Go ahead and read it, Daniel.
I think it's a nice correction for us.
Okay.
So Wayne writes, "Dear Dr. Griffin, it is not often I disagree with you and the other experts, the various TWiP podcasts. Most of the time I fully agree with specialty crews, especially in the use of correct terminology such as DNA mutations versus amino acid changes in proteins. One of my pet peeves is diseases are not transmitted, pathogens are. However, this week I feel as though I have to correct you in your discussion in TWiP 241 podcast 5109 on babesiosis. You indicate that ticks can jump from a piece of grass to a host. I have worked with ticks for the past 25 years and have yet to see one jump. They will wait until you brush against the foliage on which they are waiting, then grab hold of you. They do not jump onto you. That said, there was an interesting paper that came out last year that could suggest a jump. Static electricity passively attracts ticks onto hosts. So I will agree that I did look further into this. And Dr. Hines, you are correct. I stand corrected. This is interesting. They're in this like questing position on the end of the blades of grass. But yeah, they don't actually have the ability to jump, other than, as you can watch in this interesting video, there is this static electricity where they appear to cross a distance, but it is not a leap or a jump.
Do you know, when I was little, I was also told that ticks can jump, and particularly they would jump off trees onto you. So
yeah, that is also apparently a myth. Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff, that my parasitology teacher taught me that turns out.
I beg your pardon. I never covered that area, trust me. But the
is
questing,
true. That is
it's
true.
interesting if you see a picture of a tick in the wild, and we have one in our book. It's on a blade of grass, and they've got Vincent likes me to do this, so they've got 4 legs on each side. They only use one leg to hold on to the grass with. So when something brushes up against them, it's very easy to pull off the grass and go onto the animal that's passing by.
Also has 6 additional legs to grab hold.
They do. And I meant to say something about that last time, but I said, don't be pathetic.
All right.
Okay, that's TWiP 243. You can find the show notes at microbe.tv/TWiP. Send in your guesses to twip@microbe.tv. If you enjoy these programs, we'd like to have your support. Microbe.tv/contribute. Daniel Griffin is at Columbia University Irving Medical Center, parasiteswithoutborders.com. Thank you, Daniel.
Oh, thank you. And everyone, be safe.
Dixon Despommier, trichinella.org, thelivingriver.org. Thank you, Dixon.
The same wishes with Daniel. Everybody be safe, and I had a great time.
Christina Nels at the University of Glasgow. Thank you, Christina.
Well, thank you. I had fun as always, and have a really good weekend.
Yep.
I'm Vincent Racaniello. You can find me at microbe.tv. I'd like to thank the American Society for Microbiology for their support of TWiP and Ronald Jenkins for the music. So who's going to do it today? I did it last time.
I can do it.
Okay. You've been listening to This Week in Parasitism. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back soon.
Another episode is parasitic.
No, that's not right, Dixon. Do it again, please.
TWiP is parasitic.
Do it again.
This week.
Just do it again. TWiP is parasitic.
No, another TWiP.
Hey, I'm getting old, okay? Another TWiP is parasitic.
Very nice. I mean, you must have done that 100 times, Dixon.
Sometimes I like to ad lib. What can I say?